The courthouse stood like an old sentinel in the heart of town, its stone pillars weathered by years of service to justice. The grand windows let in the morning light, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Despite its beauty, the atmosphere inside felt suffocating, as if the weight of countless past decisions was pressing down on those within. Vanessa Holloway sat at the defense table, composed, almost serene. Her dark brown skin glistened faintly under the fluorescent lights, her braids neatly framing a strong, determined face. The quiet strength she emanated was unmistakable. To those paying attention, she was more than just a defendant. She was a woman in control, waiting for the right moment to strike. Across the room, Officer Derek Calloway exuded confidence. His uniform was flawless, his badge gleaming, his demeanor one of someone used to being in charge. He knew that to Dara, his word would be gospel, and Vanessa's fate would rest in his hands. But in the quiet tension of the courtroom, Vanessa's stillness hinted at a different story. She wasn't just here to defend herself. She was here to dismantle the lies that had been built around her. Prosecutor Vincent Langston was the first to speak, his voice smooth and practiced. He painted the picture of Vanessa as the aggressor, an unpredictable woman who had escalated a simple situation into a confrontation with a police officer. His words were sharp, and he leaned heavily on the supposed danger posed by Vanessa's actions. The room fell into murmurs as he described how Officer Calloway had been forced to restrain her after she attacked him. Vanessa sat quietly, her expression unreadable, but her mind was calculating. She knew that the story being told was far from the truth, and that soon the lies would unravel. Defense attorney Nathaniel Vaughn stood and addressed the jury. His voice, although softer than Langston's, carried an undeniable strength. He spoke of the fabricated nature of the story being told, casting doubt on Officer Calloway's version of events. With each word, he created cracks in the prosecution's case. He promised that Vanessa would tell a different story, one where the truth would shine through. Officer Calloway took the stand with the calm confidence of someone who believed his word was untouchable. He recounted the night in question, claiming that Vanessa had been hostile and aggressive when he had asked for identification. He said she physically assaulted him and reached for his service weapon, leaving him no choice but to restrain her. But Nathaniel, prepared and precise, questioned him with calm authority. He pointed out the absence of any injuries on Calloway's body, despite the officer's claims of being physically assaulted. Calloway stammered, trying to justify the discrepancy. The cracks in his story began to widen. Nathaniel pressed on, revealing that Vanessa had sustained injuries during the altercation. The audience began to murmur, and Calloway's once confident demeanor started to falter. The atmosphere shifted when Nathaniel introduced a video into evidence. The courtroom fell silent as the grainy footage began to play, showing Calloway approaching Vanessa, his flashlight blinding her, and his demanding voice instructing her to show her ID. Vanessa calmly responded, but things quickly escalated when Calloway grabbed her arm, ignoring her protests. The video captured a chilling moment. "Women like you don't get to question me." The words echoed in the room, and a gasp rippled through the courtroom. Calloway, on the stand, couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. Vanessa's gaze never left him, and it was clear. The truth was no longer something that could be hidden. After the video, the courtroom was in turmoil. Calloway's facade had crumbled, and the lies he had crafted seemed to unravel in front of everyone. Nathaniel finished his cross-examination with a quiet, confident declaration, "I rest my case." The judge adjourned the court, but the tension lingered in the air. As Vanessa walked out of the courtroom, she exchanged a brief, silent glance with Calloway. He couldn't look her in the eye. Outside, the cool air of the evening wrapped around her. Nathaniel caught up with her, his voice low. That video. It destroyed him. Vanessa looked ahead, her resolve unwavering. It's just the beginning. The next few days after the video came to light felt like a storm was brewing. Not only in the courthouse, but in the town as well. The video had gone viral, and news outlets were calling it a clear case of police misconduct. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs and chanting for justice. People from all walks of life were talking about it, their opinions polarized. Some viewed Vanessa as a victim, while others saw her as a threat to law enforcement. Vanessa could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. But there was a fire in her that hadn't been there before. This was no longer just about her freedom, it was about something much bigger. Exposing the system that had wronged her, and countless others like her. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Prosecutor Langston was under pressure to recover from the damage caused by the video. Officer Calloway, once so sure of himself, was now the subject of intense scrutiny. Rumors were swirling about his past behavior, and the pressure was building. His colleagues, who had once stood by him, were beginning to question his integrity. But despite the mounting pressure, Langston continued to push forward with his case, now trying to spin the narrative that Vanessa had somehow instigated the situation. The media coverage of the trial intensified. Vanessa's every move was scrutinized. Journalists were camped outside the courthouse, desperate for a glimpse of her. Some had painted her as a hero, while others tried to discredit her by digging into her past. The public opinion was split right down the middle, but Vanessa remained focused. On the fifth day of the trial, the defense received an unexpected surprise. A new witness, someone who had been present at the scene of the altercation, came forward. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, a local teacher who had been walking by the area when the confrontation occurred. She had seen the entire exchange from a distance and had recorded a second video on her phone, capturing the moments leading up to Vanessa's arrest. When Sarah took the stand, her testimony was a game-changer. She confirmed that Vanessa had never been the aggressor. She painted a picture of a woman who had been calm, compliant, and respectful until Officer Calloway escalated the situation. Sarah described how Calloway had grabbed Vanessa without warning, demanding her ID in an aggressive manner, and how Vanessa had merely tried to defend herself. The room fell silent as Sarah played her video for the jury. This footage was different from the first one. It showed Vanessa standing still while Calloway advanced toward her. Vanessa didn't move until Calloway forcefully grabbed her arm. The crowd watched as Sarah's voice echoed through the courtroom. This is the moment they want you to forget. This is the truth. It was clear to everyone now that Calloway's story was falling apart. The evidence against him was stacking up, and the prosecution's case was beginning to crumble. Vanessa could see the frustration in Langston's face as he tried to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The tide had turned. The trial was nearing its end, and both sides had presented their cases. It was time for the closing arguments. Prosecutor Langston stood first, his usual confidence faltering as he spoke. His argument was shaky. He tried to paint Vanessa as a troublemaker, someone who had refused to cooperate with a police officer. But the evidence contradicted him at every turn. In his closing statement, Nathaniel stood tall, his voice unwavering. He reminded the jury of the key facts, the video evidence, the witness testimonies, and the officers' inconsistent statements. He painted a vivid picture of a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had been treated unfairly and had fought for her rights. He spoke of the larger implications, the need for accountability, the importance of truth, and the fight for justice that went beyond the courtroom. Vanessa sat quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't show it. She had done everything she could. Now it was in the hands of the jury. The jury deliberated for hours. Vanessa could barely sit still, her mind racing as she replayed every moment of the trial in her head. The tension in the room was unbearable. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she had prepared herself for either possibility. Nathaniel had done everything he could, but the final decision wasn't up to him. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom. The judge called the room to order, and the verdict was read aloud. Not guilty. The words hit Vanessa like a wave. She didn't hear the rest of the proceedings, her mind frozen in disbelief. The room erupted into applause, but Vanessa stood still, her hands shaking. It wasn't relief she felt. It was a quiet satisfaction. She had won, but there was still so much work to be done. Outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered. Some shouted words of encouragement, while others expressed their anger. The fight for justice was far from over, but Vanessa knew this was just the beginning. The battle for truth, for accountability, was only starting. As she walked out of the courthouse, Nathaniel by her side, she didn't look back. She knew that her victory in the courtroom was only a small part of a much larger story. There were still more battles to fight, but she was ready. She had faced the storm, and now it was time to rise above it. The fight for justice was far from over, but Vanessa Holloway was no longer just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with.